Alrighty, so I've got what I think will be an incredibly fun one for a lot of you. This is going to be my Legends of the Force testing primer. I'll be breaking down, well, a lot. We'll be talking about all the good decks from the previous set, how they can be changing, which ones of them might be getting better or worse, some newcomers that might pop into the meta because of the new set's release and the cards in it, and of course, breaking down Legends of the Force itself, some leading candidates from the leader pool there, and a whole lot else. So before we get going, please hit that subscribe button. And if you're interested in some more content from me, do check out my Patreon as well. The link will be in the description. All right, so first off, I'm going to be separating this into kind of two main sections. Then the first is going to be a review of the previous meta's most powerful decks, what tools they may have gotten from Legends of the Force to make their deck better, what else may be changing about them in terms of how they will operate in a new meta game, right? Just because a deck got new toys doesn't mean it will continue to be very good if a lot of other decks also improved, or if there's some new mechanics in the new set that kind of push or like squelch a little bit its power level. So we'll be breaking down all the good decks from the previous set, and on top of that, also talk about some leaders from sets 1 through 4 that have gotten new toys, new tools, ways to improve, and see if maybe some of those can push into the metagame. Then the second large part will be looking at Legends of the Force itself, especially the leaders there, and see which ones of them might be able to push into the meta, why I think they may be good, and ways that I think you can start building them. Now remember, this is a very early look into the format. This is not definitive. This is based on limited data and early testing, early evaluation of cards, right? I just want to try to give you as many ideas as possible to kickstart your gaming with Legends of the Force. And the last part be pretty short. I will kind of give you a short way that I recommend you start your testing process, especially if you're looking to compete in tournaments, whether it's the Galactic Championships in a month or sectors and regionals and PQs following that for Season 1. All right, so first, let's get into the decks from the previous meta, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Sabine ECL. Personally, I think this deck's trending up right now, and it's not because of any new cards. In fact, I wanted to put new additions for every deck, but like it was very difficult to find anything to put for Sabine. I put Yoda's lightsaber as like a potential card that you might look at as a 3-power, 2-cost upgrade for this deck, but essentially this deck is unchanged. And that doesn't mean it's going to get worse, right? It's already very powerful. A lot of decks are not going to get drastically different with Legends of the Force. Legends of the Force is a very consolidated sort of inbred sort of set, which means that a lot of the powerful cards and mechanics in that set require pure build around. So existing decks might not get tons of tools, but what Sabine does well is beat up on experimental decks. It's incredibly efficient and one of the most consistent decks in the game, and early in formats it happens every time. You start respecting aggro decks a little less because they're not new, or especially this one's not going to be very new, and I could see even people early not actually getting in a lot of games against this because it's like same old. But when push comes to shove and a tournament's going to start and people are looking to win, this deck is going to be there. People are going to play it because it's very good, and you're going to need to be very prepared for it. And a lot of brews right now, I think, are not respecting it entirely. I think a lot of brews especially are not respecting space entirely. And Sabine, although not a pure space deck, can very much present a very powerful space opening and kind of beat you in that arena if you choose to ignore it. So I don't have a ton of input here about Sabine. This is the same deck, but it's not going anywhere. So be ready. Another one that I think is trending up, and this is because of potential major shifts in the way it's designed, is Han 2. And most of the decks I'm going to be talking about in this section are not going to be like rebuilds of decks. Han 2 might end up being a rebuild because of the Force mechanic. He operates very, very well with the Force payoff and enablers that are introduced in Legends of the Force. So yes, he could still be like a Data Vault deck, which is the most popular version of him now, and he gets some help there. I mean, specifically Keller and Beck is an absolute bomb with or without the Force build around. That's like a 6-cost Ewing for Han, but he will also very much be built around a Force payoff. Blue being likely the more popular version, but green also having a lot of interesting tools. Both of them get to play red, though, and red is the red Force stuff for Han too. It's probably the most powerful. Ki-Adi-Mundi, probably the best card in the set. Very good. Also very good when you get to play him a turn early. Same with Mace Windu. These are cards with very front-loaded abilities, which means that discount on their cost is very, very pushed. When you have powerful interplay effects, the discounts you get with resource cheating from this leader are very powerful. Blue also has nice tools, right? Itinerant Warrior and Chirrut, both very powerful. There's, of course, the blue shell that already kind of exists that plays Force units with like Luke ahead of curve and things like that. Green also has nice stuff, right? Yoda's a very, very powerful bomb. Keller and Beck. And I didn't put every card here, but there's like curve fillers through the roof for this deck, whether or not you're looking at like Gungi and Obi-Wan in green, or you look at Yaddle in blue, or Adi Gallia in red, right? This deck curves very well because it has redundancy at all stages of the curve because of Han's powerful ability. So because of this Force mechanic, I do expect a potential shift in the way Han 2 is built. He is certainly trending up. I think if you're making a red Force deck, he is probably my number one choice currently because of the way he can get all these payoffs out early. It just works very smoothly with him. You can also still build, like I said, the Data Bolt version, even the 30 health blue version, although there I think you probably should operate more on the Force blue side of things. And, you know, there's ways to also not build this deck entirely around the Force, although you do probably need a large portion of your deck to enable the Force interaction, and you only have room for a few non-Force cards. But I expect this deck to be one of the more, especially early on, one that gets a lot of playtesting, a lot of popularity around it, because it might be the best way to build with the new Force mechanic in set 5. All right, next, another Han, and this is Han 1, and I have him as trending down, actually, and it's not because he didn't get new toys. I mean, Qui-Gon and Keller and Beck are both bomb 7s, and, you know, the best thing you do in this leader is go from 5 to 7, double ramp on a turn, play a bomb early, really push your tempo that way. You can also look at Qui-Gon Jinn's Ether Sprite is an interesting card with him, especially because you can play it a turn earlier. Works really well with a lot of interplay effects. A lot of them are discard effects or bounce effects, like Cantina Bounce or Ahsoka, Qi'ra. So he's got new toys. My issue with him right now is Force Throw is just kind of everywhere. It's a very good card against this leader, who kind of has to operate sometimes early with a smaller hand. And not only that, is very dependent on getting a clean attack off with his leader. And Force Throw is, especially in decks that play Ki-Adi-Mundi and have full grips all the time, can one-shot your leader. They can self-discard with kind of impunity right now if they're playing Ki-Adi-Mundi. One-shot your leader, you lose all that tempo you would have otherwise been able to get from going 5 to 7. So I think the trend down here is not so much because the deck got worse. It's more because I expect other decks to be playing Force Throw a lot more than you might have been used to. And Han was already favored into kind of the only Force Throw deck, which was Quinnland, but Quinnland could not, first of all, stick Force early and often in this matchup, and also wasn't in a position where it could always self-toss bombs at Han. Right now, I think trending down, but not all hope is lost. This is still a very powerful leader with a very powerful effect. Might need to retool a little bit how it wants to use his ability and how much he can rely on clean attacks in certain matchups. But I expect still a lot of work to get put into this leader. It's still a fan favorite, and it still has a very high power floor. All right, next I've got Qi'ra here, and I've got it at kind of trending neutral, and that might come as a surprise to a lot of you because it got one of the best cards in the set as an addition to its deck, which is Darth Vader. But one thing I will note about this card is it doesn't really improve Qi'ra's game plan into aggro, and it doesn't really improve Qi'ra's game plan that much into like control decks. Where it shines is into like mid-range unit-based strategies, and it's very good there, specifically when you build it around ambush, either through energy conversion lab or timely intervention. The problem being that both of those things require pretty major deck building concessions. And even if you're playing ECL, you likely still need to add timely interventions to your deck. You're adding the Vaders to your deck. These are a lot of cards being added into a deck to make the deck better into mid-rangey, ground-based strategies. But then the cards you're cutting, well, what are they? Well, I don't know what they are yet, but they are something, and they are something that was helping you in likely some other situations. So you can't just look at it and be like, well, Vader is a direct upgrade over X card, therefore deck got better, because Vader's not really replacing a card in the deck that was filling a similar role. In fact, the deck really played no 6-drops other than the card Vigilance, right? But anything you replace in your cost curve is taking away from some other matchup with this card. Is it still worth it? Probably. It's just, there's a reason I'm thinking about this as more of a trending neutral, because I expect there's going to be a little bit of a push and pull here. Some other cards that improve this deck potentially. Supremacy Tie is just a much better Sentinel in space than the deck has ever really had access to, because you can shield it. Black Sun, you never could shield it with Qi'ra's ability, so that's a pretty major get. Eye of Sion, a little fringy, but certainly a card that if you expect a lot of space aggro could pop in, right? Then you can actually really curve out in space with like Inferno 4, Supremacy Tie, you've got Devastating Gunship, Eye of Sion. All of a sudden, you just have a lot of anti-space aggression in your deck. Will the deck be better with Data Vault or Energy Conversion Lab is a question I get asked a ton. I'm not surprised I get asked it a ton, because I played this deck a lot with a lot of success, but I don't have a clear answer for that question just yet. ECL still, I feel sometimes I can get cheesed out of games that I felt like I was winning just because of that life differential, and it's not quite as easy as you might think it is to save it until 6 to Darth Vader. When you're getting pressured, you sometimes just have to use that ECL earlier, whether it's with something like a Lone Pike or Devastating Gunship, and then all of a sudden that Vader in your hand might be a dead card if you don't draw timely intervention, or it's coming out a turn or two later if you did. So ECL, while it gives access to one of the most powerful plays possible, which is a 6-cost ambushing Darth Vader, it comes with a pretty heavy cost. And Data Vault means that your Darth Vader is never doing the 6-cost play, which is a bummer, and you do still need to include those timely interventions, but you do have a lot more wiggle room with how you build a deck in Data Vault. So both I expect to be good decks. I mean, I have no doubt that Qi'ra will still be very good, but there's one other potential wrinkle in this leader's strategy right now, is that this is a control deck that operates on a very grindy sort of game plan, especially against hero grindy decks, which, you know, existed in set 4, like Rey and Han 2 green, right? These are decks that operate on card advantage and who can kind of wrestle more card advantage out of your opponent. I expect a lot of these hero grindy decks to be built around Ki-Adi-Mundi now, which is a nightmare card for Qi'ra in a lot of ways, because it is not only a 4-power unit that comes out early, but it buries you in card advantage, something that up until now was not easy to accomplish for hero decks, because they had to do things like play Mon Mothma to draw cards and Bright Hope to bounce their own cards, and then wait until like the 7s to get things like Ewing to outgrind you with cards. But now they just have the most powerful on-rate card draw ability in the game with Ki-Adi-Mundi, and that can be tough to overcome, especially because early in the game you don't have a lot of ways to keep your opponent off the force. So that might affect the way you have to build your Qi'ra deck if you start finding that you can't outgrind hero mid-range anymore, which is something that I didn't think typically a deck like this had a problem doing. But It got new toys. It was already one of the best decks in the game. So not saying it's trending down. I'm not saying it's trending up. Right now, I'm kind of on status quo for this, and we'll see how the meta evolves. Another trending neutral here is Vader Yellow, and I don't have much to say here. The reason it's trending neutral is because it's essentially an unchanged deck. It's got this new 1-drop ship that might be better than the 1/2 Saboteur. It's a 1/1 raid 1 with hidden. Very exciting stuff for Vader. But where's the positive for Vader? Well, the positive for Vader is it's a pure space deck in a format where a lot of people are playing pure ground decks because everything with the force mechanic is on the ground. So a lot of people ignoring you right now, which is a nice place to be. Whereas potential downside, well, force throw being everywhere is definitely a problem for this deck that tries to play 2 1-drops on turn 1, and all their units have 2 or 1 health for the first few turns, and you get double force thrown on like turn 2 or 3, and you might just lose the game on the spot, right? So there is a little tension there. Whether or not decks on the ground, those force decks, are going to be able to interact with you well, I think as currently constructed in early versions of them, maybe not. But I think there's tools that a lot of these decks can play to potentially reach up into the skies. But I think this deck is powerful. It's a very linear deck that does a thing, like it does its thing pretty much every game. And if it's not disrupted for a turn or two, it can get out of hand really, really quickly, right? Everyone's seen those games where they go like double 1-drop, then they capture or bounce your turn 2 play. All of a sudden, you're facing down like 4 or 5 units. Very hard to come back. They play like a clone ship or a lurking tie or a victor leader, and all of a sudden, you're just getting hit so hard, and that Vader turn comes down and ends the game. So, an unchanged deck for the most part, but still one I would recommend you respect and understand that between this and Sabine, and potentially some other newcomers, there's going to be space in the meta, and you can't ignore it forever. All right, trending down deck I've got here is Rey Green, and Rey is a powerful, grindy mid-range deck that I alluded to earlier. So why is it getting a little worse? Well, partially because other decks can grind now really well, and Rey was kind of the master at this. These low cost value plays with lots of card draw, lots of like pokey enter the play effects early on, lots of stall, and then just endless piles of, you know, maybe bad units, but bad units that Rey could make good. But now I think specifically this clashes a little bit with the force mechanic in Qi'ra, which is also a very grindy mechanic. There's built-in card draw. There's very powerful interplay effects on a lot of those units. And they come down, and they're just bigger and better for the most part than the units that Rey is used to playing and making good use of early in the game. So there's a little conflict there. She might no longer be the best thing at grinding value in the hero pool. Now, you can say, well, then why doesn't Rey build around this force mechanic? And I think, especially if you're going to stick with green, you're going to start conflicting with the new Obi-Wan leader. Because Obi-Wan, does her same ability for free. So if you're going to build around the force mechanic in a blue-green shell, is it better to just switch to Obi-Wan at that point? Now, there are a lot of good new units that you could play in a more traditional Rey deck, even if you're not playing Force, right? Gunji and Yaddle are both very good turn 1 plays in a Rey deck. Owen Lars, really good, especially if you can pump enough Force units into the deck, which you likely can because you add some of these other 2-drops. You can add Kelleran Beck. You have Luke in the deck. So he's kind of like Moisture Farmer that also draws you a Force unit. So pretty powerful. All in all, I don't think this deck is bad. And its trending down here is not because it got worse. It's more that it's clashing a little bit with a lot of other hero decks that are also being built to grind out a lot of card advantage and card value through their units, which Rey was kind of doing in conjunction with Han 2, and now is going to be doing it with potentially a lot of other decks. and certainly with Han 2 and maybe like the new Obi leader and some other hero mid-range decks. So it might not be able to grind as well. And this is also a kind of deck, especially if you're not playing red and don't have card advantage, that can suffer a little bit from ambushing Vaders, the new Darth Vader, whether it's from a Qi'ra deck or some other villain green-blue shell. This kind of deck definitely suffers from having to deal with ambushing Darth Vaders. I mentioned that when I talk about Qi'ra, that Vader, where it really thrives is against like mid-rangey ground warfare. And when you don't have great ways to like interact with it cleanly, or outgrind it with card advantage, especially card draw, then it can punish your deck build quite a lot. And they're all put together. I think this means that Rey is a slight trend down coming into the release of set 5. So next up, we're going to talk about Anakin Blue. And this is a leader that I think could still stick to its non-force based shell. It does still benefit a lot from the new units that it got, especially early in the curve, like Secretive Sage, Adigalia, and Yaddle. These are all really powerful with Anakin's ability, and they also turn on Force Throw early in the game. Itinerant Warrior is really, really good with Anakin. Basically anything with shielded that has decent stats, it's really good with his ability. But I think there is also the potential that he can be another red-based Force deck. It does conflict a little with Han 2, and like I said, I think Han 2 might be the best version at extracting the most value from Force units because they're so good ahead of curve. But Anakin does something really interesting with the abundance of really powerful early game units that this blue-red hero shell has, is that he's going to be really good at keeping people off the Force, especially if you start the game with initiative. All these units are usually low attack, high health. Anakin bridges that gap really well with his ability. He's going to be really good at slaying units ahead of curve. If he can chain whichever one of the Secretive Sage into like another shielded unit, into Itinerant Warrior, and just keep removing opponents' units, it's not going to be so easy for them to stick the Force interaction. So whether or not you stick to an older shell of Anakin or bridge into this new Force mechanic, I think you'll have a pretty powerful mid-rangey ground-based controlling strategy that then can use Anakin to finish off the game. I'm keeping this at a trending neutral though, because similarly to Rey, this can be, especially if you're not playing the Force with like Ki-Adi-Mundi and getting a pure grinding advantage, can get hit pretty hard by that Darth Vader ambush, right? This is a leader that you'd expect to be able to get a clean attack off. Now, green villain decks could already one-shot him with something like Maul, so he is not like the new Vader doesn't automatically just like say, oh, now they can kill a leader they never could, but it's just more ways for them to one-shot this leader and interact with his very powerful stat line. That maybe knocks it down a peg, not a ton. The other reason I'm kind of keeping this at a trending neutral is, like I've mentioned multiple times already, Han 2 might end up just being the better version of a red-based Force deck. He's very powerful at using that mechanic. So I would currently try to build this both ways and see kind of which sticks, whether it's the Force stuff where we do like Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace Windu, or we just go old school, we get more space units, which of course can matter a lot because it's very difficult to play space when you're on the Force mechanic. You get more shielded units, like the Outer Rim Outlaw can be a really powerful card in this shell. You can just get much more freedom in your card selection when you don't have to worry about every unit having Force. Of course, you still run Force Throw and you still run these good Force units because they're good even if you're not playing with the mechanic. All right, next, Quinnland Tarkin Town, and I have this on a bit of a trend up right now because of how good it is at interacting with the Force decks. Tarkin Town, this ping ability, if you've played yet and tested against Force decks, you'll notice that when they lose the Force and then they can't stick something to get it back, their deck sort of crumbles. And Quinnland is a very good way to try to mess with their ability to get the Force interaction. He's got some newcomers to the deck, potentially. The Quinnland Voss unit does conflict with Ahsoka and Qi'ra. I don't think you can play a bunch of all of them, but Quinnland gives the deck a much more aggressive slant than it's used to having. Previously, basically every unit hits for 2 or 3 outside of the Plo Koon coordinate, while Quinnland can hit for 4, which is already changing the math, but it can also hit for like 8 with a hot shot blaster or 9 with a surprise strike. It can really change math. So interesting card. Couple new 2-drops you can play. Adigalia, I think almost certainly you will, just because it's an early Force throw enabler, way better than any turn 1 Force unit Quinnland used to have. The Starfighter, it's an A-wing alternative, or you can just go both and just be more in space. And he's got a decent equipment now. There really wasn't anything powerful to equip onto Quinnland, but Constructed Lightsaber is pretty nice. +2/+3 and Restore 2 really does a lot. He becomes a 5/10 Restore 2, and against some matchups that can be really deadly. So lots of new options to play with in this deck. The core is still the same. It's still a disruptive aggro hero deck. Plays the discard package really well. Plays to the board and that early board control really well, and tries to turn the corner through pumps and through smuggle and things like that. So the reason I'm putting it a trend up, like I said, is mostly because I find that it interacts pretty well with the Force mechanic. It was already, in that middle ground. I felt like it was like a fair deck that, had not great matchups all through, but was also a deck that never really had awful matchups, which is a nice place to be. So keep an eye on Quinnland, and we'll see what comes of him entering set 5. And with that, we've got another Tarkin Town deck, and for very similar reasons, I'm going to put it on a trend up. Cad Bane might even be better at interacting with the Force mechanic because his pings are much more guaranteed than Quinnland's, where like a Han 2, for instance, can play units ahead of curve, dodging Quinnland's pings. Nothing really dodges Cad's pings, so he still does this same board interactive thing, and he, can interact with space pretty well, all things considered, even though he is still predominantly a ground-based deck. There are some decent underworld space units. The pings, of course, and cards like McClunky can go across arena, so can capture cards like Relentless Pursuit. So he is not like scooping to something like a Vader deck, right? Of course, there is a Silver Bullet card against Cad Bane, which is a Lurking TIE Phantom in that Vader deck, but you have to find ways to deal with that if you expect to see Vader. Newcomers here, the biggest one is Aura Singh. This might be the best 2-drop on rate in the game. It's a fantastic addition. It's not like revolutionary, but what you need to understand is when a deck, it goes from like having a bunch of mediocre turn 1 plays to one that is far better than any it ever had options to. It's just a buff, right? It's a strict buff to the deck. You also have like Nile Marauder if you'd like, as in like kind of extra copies of Boba Fett. Boba Fett is better, but Nile Marauder does some interesting stuff. Marchion Ro, I don't know if he's good, but if he's going to be good anywhere, it'll likely be in a Cad Bane deck that plays the aforementioned 2 raid units, plus the leader itself has raid. There are some new underworld space units, the Strike Fighter, whatever it's called, it's a 0/3 with raid, and then there's another one, a 2/3 with raid 2. I didn't put them on this list. That does shift the way that you would build this deck. It would be much more aggressive in nature if you're starting to play low power, high raid units in space. You're kind of moving away from its ground-based dominance if you go that way. And its ground-based dominance is what makes it good into Force decks that are trying to stick to Force and get ahead with that mechanic. So, similar to Quinnland, I'd say this is on a little bit of a trend up. I'm going to mention this one more time. This does get hit pretty hard by the new Vader because Cad Bane, really, there was nothing that could one-shot him previously, at least not like realistically. I mean, it's certainly possible, but 8 health meant it did dodge things like Maul, and there weren't a lot of good ways to just instantly remove him, and there is now, and that can be a problem because you certainly need to extract a lot of value out of this leader. It's a big reason why he's any good is because of how powerful he is on the deploy side. So something to keep an eye out for. All right, so quick hitters now. That was like the bulk of the top meta from last set, and like not even just the top meta. I went pretty deep into there. This is just going to be quick hitters though. Bosk, mostly boss control. It doesn't really get any help. You can look at Crushing Blow if you want just even more ways to kill your opponent's turn 1 play. Overall, I think it's probably going to trend down with hero grindy decks, something it's supposed to be able to beat. Getting even better at grinding, right? Like Ki-Adi-Mundi, I'll keep mentioning it. That's going to really bury Boskin card advantage, which is not something a 1-for-1 removal deck wants to see. So not much changes here. Bosk wasn't getting played a ton anyway. It's always like on the outskirts and like spikes some events for sure, because there is innate power into the strategy, but not much to shift here. Grand Animal Thrawn, not a leader that was very popular, but does get some help, especially in grinding with Night Sister Warrior and Owen Lars. Both can draw a bunch of cards. If you're going into yellow, Legacy Run is kind of nuts if you can ever like pull off the combo and get it to deal 12. And then, you know, if you're playing in green and get like access to ambushing and stuff like that, you can of course look at something like Vader and play this more as like a Qi'ra-esque blue-green mid-rangey control deck, whereas instead of having like early access to a powerful board stopping leader that also enables barrage, you get access to more card advantage and card grinding engines with the units that Grand Animal Thrawn combos well with, like the Warrior, Owen Lars, of course Cobb Vanth. So some interesting stuff to look at with Grand Animal Thrawn. Got a couple pilots here. Kazuda, especially in blue, has gotten some help. Loth Wolf, Ogdo Bogdo are both units that he can turn on. You know, if you put too many units that require Kazuda's ability, then all of a sudden it's like difficult to ever attack with any of them. And then you sometimes end up in situations where you deploy and then maybe they kill him and then all your units are just kind of stuck. So don't overdo it, but a blue shell Kazuda can be quite interesting. The Boba Fett pilot, especially in green, was making some rounds towards the end of the set 4 meta. I don't think the deck drastically shifts. You can look at this new legendary HK47. It's maybe a slight buff as a turn 1 play to the deck. Certainly nothing to sneeze at. Like, it's good to have better rate cards, but overall I don't see tons of change to this. It was kind of on the fringe of the meta where it was spiking some events. I don't think it was a bad deck. I don't think it drastically changes, and it might even be able to exploit some of these early decks just because it's kind of a very proactive aggro deck that operates a lot in space, similar to how Kazuda might also operate a lot in space. All right, next, Yoda. So the biggest upgrade I could see that for this deck is actually this Rey unit, which works surprisingly well with Yoda. First of all, it doesn't work off of Yoda's ability directly, right? You can't put her on top and then draw her with Yoda, but you can always put her on top of your deck with Yoda's ability and then play your draw engines. And there are a lot, right? There's Ki-Adi-Mundi. You can play the X-Wing that draws a card when you play it. You have like the Yoda unit that dies and draws a card. There's a lot of ways to trigger this, and free rolling this ability on Rey is actually really nice, and it's probably the biggest buff that Yoda got. He would still then be in a red grindy mid-range deck, and he's a 7-cost deploy leader. There's going to be innately problems with aggro when you build around that, but this might be able to go over the top a lot of the other grindy mid-range hero decks because your leader is kind of a mirror buster in that sense, right? He's bigger, he kills something, right? It does much more than like Han 2 does, for instance, in terms of like a leader. But as with most 7-cost leaders, there's going to be issues with aggro. And then Gar Saxon's another one that, you know, every set we just look like you type shielded and see what comes up, and well, a lot came up this time. Secret Sage, Axe Woves, like in a yellow shell you can play 9 2/2 shieldeds on turn 1, and then you can play like 9 shielded units on turn 2 with like Outer Rim Outlaws, Axe Woves, 7th Fleet Defender, and then Shinhati too. I didn't even mention it. That's 12. You just have infinite of these like shielded units that you can run. You can also play ECL or green with Gar Saxon, where you get slightly less of these shielded units, but you get an ambushing Darth Vader. You can even do an ambushing Darth Vader in yellow if you play Qi'ra Flurry. And, Vader has a shield, so he can actually come in and hit for 6 instead of the normal 5. So lots of cool things to do with Gar. Still a very, especially as a yellow deck, it's a very telegraphed and, on rails aggro deck. It kind of does one thing. And one issue it does have is that all these shielded units that used to actually brawl really well on the ground as 3/2s, they can't kill your opponent's turn 1 plays a lot of the time because they're playing a bunch of 2/4s and sometimes even a 2/5 like Gunji. So that definitely knocks them down a peg. But Gar got better for sure. These are all very good units in a Gar-Saxon deck. And the last leader I wanted to just hit on is Chancellor Palpatine. He got a lot, right? Turn 1 plays like Lothwolf and Yaddle operate really nicely in this deck. I think usually this is played as a blue shell, almost a mono blue shell a lot of time to activate Lieutenant Shelton and Queel. But the main buff here to this archetype is Anakin Skywalker. He is probably the cleanest way to enable it alongside a couple other leaders that also can play off aspect cards. And Anakin, when it's enabled, is incredibly, incredibly powerful. He's also in the color to do things like Qi'ra Flurry plus Darth Vader, or Qi'ra Flurry plus Anakin for that matter. So in addition to getting some early units to run in this shell, it got some bangers towards the end of the curve. You will never be able to undo the biggest downside of this leader, which is that you don't actually get a leader. And also you do sometimes just clunk out, have the wrong half of your deck, or your opponent knows how to play around this very, very well and doesn't let you get good flips off. And that is sometimes kind of frustrating. Sometimes it just hums and gels and you're just like, yes, everything's on curve and you're just crushing. But there is a very large innate downside to this leader as a whole. All right, so let's get into the Legends of the Force early insights. Force, right? So a lot of this set is built around this Force mechanic. So for this set to truly take off, it's going to need that mechanic to work. And especially on the hero side, it looks like there's a lot more support. So a lot more different strategies and might be able to use that hero Force mechanic. We already talked about a few that it might fit in from the earlier sets like Han 2, Anakin, and there's certainly new leaders as well that it can work with. Villain, it's a little more narrow. There's really right now just one that I think it really shines with, and we'll talk about that as well. There's also a few synergy-based strategies in this set, or synergy-based leaders, I should say. So we'll take a look at some of those, see if we think any of those might be able to push into the meta. Let's start, though, with the Force. So Obi-Wan is kind of the front runner here for a new leader to utilize the Force mechanic. He has a very powerful rate ability with just giving experience tokens for free cost if you have the Force. So mentioned this when I talked about Rey. If you're going to build a green-blue Force deck, this is likely the place to start, and I think blue will be his most likely pairing. Red is interesting. It has a lot of very powerful cards like Ki-Adi-Mundi and Mace. I've said it multiple times already in this video. When moving into red, it's very difficult for me to move away from Han 2 because all those units do so well ahead of curve. You also need to compete with Anakin when you're in the red, but Obi-Wan really has, I think, a bit of a foothold on the green-blue aspect. You can try him in yellow as well. I think where the issues lie, especially with yellow and red in this shell, is that your earlier units, your 2 and 3 drop slot, is much less robust than with blue. So blue has access to a card like Secretive Sage and Yaddle, which is 2 good rate Force units, and then he brings Gunji from green, and all of a sudden you're at 9 units already before you really need to dig any deeper. Whereas in both yellow and red, you're really at 6 with Gunji, and then in red you get Adi Gallia, in yellow you get the Youngling Padawan, which is really nice to be able to make a 3/4 on turn 1, but past that, your Force units become a little weaker. So as far as turn 1 plays, green-blue shines the most. Green-blue also probably shines the most in turn 2 plays because you have not only Obi-Wan Kenobi, but you get Ezra. You can do Yoda if you'd like. There's a few more options just in the early curve with blue. So I like that. I like that it makes your early game much more secure. Blue green is a very good grindy color. It has a lot of built-in restore as well into some of its units, so it can fight off aggro. It's going to be a little weak interacting with space, and it's something that's going to need to be figured out in kind of all of these Force shells. But his ability does allow him to sometimes race on the ground, throwing out experience tokens, especially the flip turn where you can get 2 experience tokens in 1 turn. He holds a General's Blade incredibly well, so do most of the units you would play in a deck like this. So I think Obi-Wan is a very powerful leader. Whether or not he makes the meta, or like in a large quantity, will just depend on whether or not his grindy version of hero midrange is any better than something like Han 2's against certain matchups, or Anakin's, or Rey's, or whatever it may be, because they're all kind of competing for a similar slice of the pie. Now, for villain, it's really Talzin. There's not much else, in my opinion, to build around villain Force outside of Talzin. She is by far the best rate leader in the set, as a 3/7 that flips on 5 with a very, very powerful leader ability and flip side ability with the minus shrink stuff. Very good board controlling leader. The package of cards that she runs with, headlined by the 4-drops Darth Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassin, are absolutely incredible and interacting early in the game on the board, especially on the ground, but also into space with the shrinking abilities. She's good in a similar way as like the Tarkintown Quinnland and Cad might be into other ground-based strategies that try to keep the Force active, because she's very good at just kind of removing units and keeping tempo. Where are some downsides? Well, the downsides are simply that the villain Force package is not nearly as supported as it is in Hero. Your turn 1 plays outside of Secretive Sage and Karis are kind of weak. Your turn 2 plays outside of Grand Inquisitor, if you're playing in red, which is probably the most likely place Talzin goes, they're all kind of weak outside of Grand Inquisitor. You're talking about things like Marin, Jedi in Hiding, Fifth Brother. They're not stars the way Hero has stars in that slot. So your early game Force units aren't nearly as good. And if you're not playing in red, you really don't have turn 2 Force plays outside of, like, in yellow you get Shin Hati, which is very good. Green has virtually nothing. So that's why, like, red is the first place to check, right? It's the one that lets you do a Force curve. Even if it's not the best Force curve, it at least lets you do it. And then, of course, you get things like Force Lightning and Force Throw, which are really powerful with this leader who's just enabling them on her own. I do want to shout out yellow, though, because I think there's some cool angles in yellow with this leader. Your Kylo Force unit on turn 1 becomes much better when you can play Hot Shot Blaster, because he can actually draw a card off of that with the sequencing that it accomplishes. You get pumps like Surprise Strike. Shin Hati's a very good card. And you get the very powerful Xi'an Flurry, which works really well with a lot of these units, especially the Darth Vader that you can run. But overall, I still think red is the much more secure package of cards for this leader, because your curve actually works. And this is a very good tempo deck that just kind of tries to get ahead and stay ahead, similar to decks like Quinnland. It does fall short in some places when compared to Quinnland, because there's just really nothing to smuggle out in this deck, or at least nothing of the power level of like Cassian and like the L3 droid or Millennium Falcon, right? There's a much more robust package in Hero for smuggling, so you can end up in situations when you're trying to grind out value, but you just don't have enough cards. And you are also a deck that really mostly functions when these 4-drops, Darth Tyrannus and Talzin's Assassins, do most of the heavy lifting. And if they don't, or if you don't draw them, or if they're not lining up correctly, a lot of the power level in the deck does falter a little bit, because they are the 2 best cards for the most part, outside of like Force Throw, which is just the best card kind of anywhere it's being played. But very good leader. Like, I want to stress this. This is, I think, is probably the best leader on rate in the set. It's just the supporting cast sometimes falters in the early game, and that can be an issue for a deck that really needs to get ahead in the early game. And then I've got a few synergy leaders to call out. So Kylo Ren's one of them. This is a pure build around leader. He could function as another like blue-green control shell, similar to Qi'ra, where he loses points into aggressive decks, of course, because he has a 7 flip, but he gets points into like the mirror, or like the blue-green mirror, because his leader is more impactful when it flips, right? He's kind of drawing multiple cards on his flip, especially if the upgrades he gets do something when you play them, like the Craving Power upgrade, for instance. He's good at filtering, and one really nice thing about this is that it's pretty easy to splash a few heroic upgrades in the deck without any idea that you'll ever play them. They're just there so that you can discard them, draw a card, and now you can turn on your Anakin unit, legendary from set 5, a very powerful unit. So that's cool. Green will be more of a traditional control shell, whereas you can run him with yellow with the goal to kind of, it's not quite OTK, one turn kill, but with snapshot reflexes, being able to attack immediately when you flip Kylo can create a huge tempo swing and potentially push upwards of double digits damage in one attack, and then threaten a claim and do it all over again. So Kylo is an interesting build around. I am lukewarm on the idea that this will ever be able to be built to beat aggro. His ability does legitimately nothing when you're getting pressured other than lose you initiative. And he comes out so late. And, you know, when he's only coming out at 7, he sometimes can't get large enough to actually win you the game. Barriss Offee, I think, is a very cool ability. The issue here is that she is in yellow, and there's like no force units in yellow. There's Shin Hati and basically a whole bunch of other blanks. So to run an actual deck with this, you most likely just have to be in blue, because that's where you'll actually be able to get some turn 1 force units and even some others throughout the curve. So yeah, you're like locked into like a weird force deck, but there are some really cool things you can do with this. My favorite is the cards that give ambush, like Sheehan Flurry and Timely Intervention, because making them free now just kind of, it's like a build your own ECL. It's really powerful. Anything that lets you cheat resources, now you can cheat an extra resource, so like Sneak Attack, or now there are 2 of them. These are cool interactions where you can like really up the curve here. Her issue, and I've said it and I keep saying it, is that the villain force package is not very well supported even in this set, unfortunately. So it's something to look out for in the future. There might be some ways to build this deck even currently without going all in on force, but we'll see. Qui-Gon Jinn, I think as far as like a value package, this can probably outvalue almost anything in the game if it gets going. Think about looping things like Home 1 into Kelleran back and things like that, right? You can really, the sky's the limit, let's say, with Qui-Gon Jinn, but the floor is also like abundantly clear, is that the moment they either kill your units or keep you off the force, you kind of end up in a really clunky deck, because you really need to get going. You need to be doing this a lot. The best things I can find to do with this are with ambush units a lot of the time, because they get a lot of value by like ambushing, surviving, and then being bounced back to your hand so that they can ambush again, especially if they have the force trait. So things like Plo Koon and Depa both have the force trait when they ambush, so they will give you the token. That's really nice. It's just sometimes difficult to really get going. When you start playing with this, you'll see that it's not, like, in theory, it seems incredibly busted to be able to do this, but in practice, it doesn't work as well in the action sequence of the game, where your opponent can really kind of do something to interrupt the whole stuff. And the last kind of synergy leader here is Avar Kriss. And the most powerful thing about this leader is the action on the front side, the free force action. I really like that ability. It fixes a lot of issues that some force decks have, where they fall behind on board and they can never get the force. The downside here, the leader itself, it's just not that impressive. It doesn't come out early very often. Like 8, I see 8. 8 should be most of the time, right? You get the force, use her ability, you play a card that uses the force, you should be able to flip. But even to get her down to 7 doesn't seem that easy to me a lot of the time. And that's a big liability, because even flipping on 7, this doesn't do anything other than read keyword big. It doesn't have a power play the way something like Yoda does, or Palpatine does, or even Kylo above here does, who's a giant sentinel. It's just a big body. And that can be a little bit of an issue because it's not going to catch you up when you are very, very far behind. But I really like the Force ability. It makes cards like the Jedi Consular, who can cheat double resources as early as turn 2, really great. You can play turn 1 Sorcerer's Blast if you're going to play in red. You don't need to worry about your early units sticking. And in fact, you can probably even play some non-Force units and just plan on having the key ones online when you need them to. If you move away from a Force base, though, it becomes basically impossible to ever double trigger Force in one turn, at which point you're really not flipping her ever before 8. And then even when you do flip her on 8, you can't get the Force back. So she's just going to stay as a 4/10 instead of an 8/10. So you're probably still locked into playing the Force base, but the front ability, really, really good. So we'll see if she can be built into like a controlling shell that can survive long enough for the leader to kind of dominate. But one other thing, that leader does get still one shot by the Darth Vader legendary. All right. So to wrap this up, just a few tips on how to start your testing. So the first few things here are kind of true no matter what. First, you have to build and iterate on a deck and get a feel for it. You play some games. It doesn't really matter what you play into at this point. You just need to even understand if your deck functions as a curve, if it does what it needs to do even against poorly designed or poorly played decks. It doesn't really matter. You have to be like self-evaluate without looking at being results oriented, right? But once you get that kind of feel for it, and this shouldn't take very many games, then you can start getting into the meta pillars, and you have to ask yourself these questions, and some of them are important. Can you beat Sabine? This is an easy thing to figure out. You play against Sabine. Sabine's been around forever. A lot of people know how to play this deck. Even a Sabine that is not being played optimally, you can still usually figure out if you can beat it, right? Unless they're taking completely random lines, you usually can tell what's going wrong if you're playing against Sabine. Past that, you also have to ask yourself, what are you doing in space? And Sabine is part of that, but there's other things like Vader or other pilot decks like maybe Kazuda or Boba that we mentioned. You have to understand that space is not gone just because right now it doesn't seem as popular because all the new flashy toys are on the ground. So you need to account for this, get a few games into mono space decks, see like, can you race them on the ground? Do you have the right interaction for the space? Are you able to deal with like a Vader flipping? Things like that. You also need your plan for the Ramp Barrage Vader style decks. This is headlined by Qi'ra, but there are a few other decks right now, like Thrawn and Kylo, for instance, that play this shell and will be ambushing the new Darth Vader and killing your high priority targets. And of course, Ramp Barrage in general is just something you need to understand how you function against. Then is the value town. Can you grind? And this a lot right now revolves around the Force interaction. When I say can you win a value war, the first thing you should be thinking about is Ki-Adi-Mundi. Can you outgrind this card? And a lot of decks really struggle with that and need to find different angles of attack, right? Maybe you have to get under it. Maybe you have to find more ways to create 2-for-1 values with your units because you're not going to be able to do it through sheer cardboard in your hand because nothing does it as well as Ki-Adi-Mundi. Nothing draws cards as well as that. So can you grind? And the leaders in this right now are like hero mid-range decks. They are probably even better at grinding than the villain control decks because of that card, Ki-Adi-Mundi. And then I will also ask, what am I doing about Tarkin Town? And this is a good question to ask, especially if you are playing a Force deck. Like, how are you maneuvering this? Are you playing a turn 1 unit? Is it better for you to be passing and letting them play? Who wins this kind of pass thing? If no one's playing units for like the first 3 turns or 2 turns, like who's ahead, right? You should figure that out, because if you know that you're if you're the Force deck and you know going pass until Quinnland plays a unit is better for you, and the Quinnland doesn't know that it's better for you, you're gonna get points, right? So Tarkin Town, that's Quinnland, that's Cad. In a sense, this is also Talzin, even though she is not a Tarkin Town deck. It's a similar style of like she can break through your units pretty early and pretty quickly. And try to keep you off the Force. And then during any of these stages, if you feel like your matchup is too awful for your deck, you return to step 1, right? Like, unless you're just okay with never beating Sabine, and then you can skip A. But, and A through E here are not really in order. You can do these in whatever order you're comfortable with, but it's kind of my recommendation that these are the 5 things right now that I want my deck to be able to account for. And I don't think you're going to find something that like is favored into all 5 of those kinds of strategies, unfortunately. If you do, let me know. I would love to hear about it. But you might have broken the format if you find something like that. But you should be favored into a few of them and not really auto losing into any of them if you want a well-rounded deck. Once you get through those, then you can start looking at other archetypes and like fringier decks. Okay, so you've been tested against Qi'ra and her Ramp Barrage package, and you feel okay. What happens when you're going into the bigger versions of blue-green, like Kylo and Thrawn? All right, so can you win a value war? Okay, so you're good against this like Han Kiadi deck, or maybe the Anakin Kiadi deck, or the Rey Data Vault. What happens when you go into the Yoda style versions of those value games, where now they have a bigger leader and can grind even better, right? But these are fringier archetypes, and I would start more with the traditional versions of these decks before I try to push my playtesting to account for the bigger style decks that usually get weeded out, frankly, by Sabine. That is just the truth, that the bigger your deck gets, and the more it tries to grind, and the more it tries to go over the top of like the more mid-rangier decks, the more value they lose against aggro. But yeah, I hope this helps you out. Let me know what you think. Let me know if there's any archetypes you think I kind of missed, or maybe downplayed or overplayed, whatever it may be. Yeah, I hope this helps in your early testing. I'm sure there'll be a lot to change over the coming weeks. This is just kind of early insight, early impressions. But yeah, let me know. And until next time, take care.